Welcome back, and this is going to be a good one. This one is around the monumental new introduction of Gordan Murray Automotive's T.33. A lot of commotion, a lot of people talking about it, and I, for one, am finding this one of the most interesting cars that I've ever come across. Does this car's design reflect the incredible engineering under the skin? Is it too much constrained or restrained by the past? Does it go far enough? Is this car going to be as memorable, as identifiable, and as unique as Gordan's F1 from the mid-90s? That is the question. My first impression of this car, meh. Now, why do I say meh? I know that this is extremely professionally designed, representing the epitome of hypercar technology, but design, I'm looking at a car that I feel that I've seen before somewhere. Now, that's not a surprise because let's get to it. Gordan has a love, as I do, as many of us do, for the absolute beauty reflected in the design of the cars from the 60s. Now, the feeling that I get when I first look at this car is a strong resemblance to what perhaps could be a modern interpretation of a 1957 Lotus Elite Type 14. The other car that reminds me a little bit of this one, almost as if it has the same genetic heritage, the same DNA, could be the Lotus Elan, the Series 3, the fixed head coupe from 1967. Perhaps a little bit from the Italian side of car design also, T.33, Stradale. Now, the reason I said meh is because when I look at this car, I'm not really feeling the element that I'm looking for, which is innovation. Again, that doesn't have to be something that is shockingly new, shockingly different than anything that we've ever seen before. But I do believe that a car like this, when you look at it, has to throw a curveball at the engineers and make them scratch their heads and think, how the heck are we gonna make this car a reality? I didn't get that spark of goosebumps inducing type design. I have to be careful with my words because I don't want to give a negative slant to this, but that seen before, done before approach doesn't seem to correlate to me with the innovation on the technology side of Gordan's genius approach to lightness, to size, to footprint, to packaging, all of that. I want it to change my mind. It's beautiful, it's very nice, of course. There's a lot of that fender swelling, that simplicity to the bonnet, and that wide intake underneath the mouth, and then an absence of a splitter. The absence of a splitter surprises me, what typically is put on the bottom edge to produce downforce, and that is making me perk up a little bit because I know that Gordan and team would not forget such a critical element. Now, if the T.33 doesn't have a splitter in the front, my only theory is that the air that is going in is not going through the top of the car, but rather perhaps underneath the car, which is very clever because that air that travels then through the radiator down underneath the car is going to be able to be used for extra downforce to create that suction of the car. So I would imagine, not having spoke to Gordan, not knowing too much about the car, but my first impression, he's done a marvelous feat of engineering. Now, a little bit of what kind of disturbs me a little bit is the feeling that the front end, like I said, has been done before. And if I can tell you a car that immediately springs to mind for me, it would be the Ferrari 612 Scaglietti design language of those front fenders coming in with a crease off the top of the fenders into those almost elliptical with a bit of aggressiveness to the ellipse, coming through there and down. So the ellipse of the headlight lens is actually almost split in two, but you can't really stick a crease. So I would imagine that the crease off the top of the fenders comes down through the lens, must soften, but then you can see it actually lineup, which is a great thing. Line flow, guys, line flow. Remember that. Lines go places. They don't just get lost in space or on a surface. And he's got that expertly controlled going into the top of the headlight lens, probably softening itself and then coming down to the edge of the lower bumper. Let's call it a bumper intake. But again, as I look at it from the front view, what's striking to me as opposed to the T50 is again that piece of design that I refer to often as being an exciting way to develop a car is what we call tumble home. Now that's the angle of the side glass as it comes up to the roof and tilts inwards. As we lean it in towards the top, as we give it more tumble home, the car starts to look much more dynamic, has less cross-sectional area, so that's much better for the aerodynamics. And I think all of that is due to the fact that we're looking at a two-seater here as opposed to the T50 being a three-seater where you're almost forced to be less angled in, less tumble home than the designer would prefer. So the fact that I could almost certainly say the car is leaning in a little bit more on the glass gives this proportion a much better feel for me from a dead-on straight front view than even the T50 or the T50S. So a positive thing, we'll check it out from the rear view, but it does look quite a bit more dynamic, I guess you could say, from the greenhouse area due to that increased tumble home. Now, the hood looks very clean, very precise, very almost Germanically precise, combined with some nice curves and those pinched edges on the top of the fenders, works very well. As the glass and the bonnet join, you have this almost flowing line, whereas most cars today have a little bit of a space between the trailing edge of the bonnet and the hood where they sink in the gubbings, wiper arm, the motor, some of the HVAC venting, things like that are in there, but they've done it very cleanly. The kind of feeling that, for example, I don't know, this will be a strange one for any of you who are really into cars, perhaps you'll recognize it. It's called the Tommy Kyra, the ZZ, done back in 2015. Look at the resemblance of that car, the Tommy Kyra. They're quite similar. Not to say, again, that is a bad thing because we're talking about good design principles and this car works off of great design principles that can do no wrong. What, for me, detracts a little bit about it is the importance that the design is giving to the central wiper. The wiper is mounted in a vertical position, kind of like if you've been in a flying vehicle with a bit of a bird impact issue, they'll put a pillar in the center part. Now, what is my overall first impression of the face? How can I relate it to something? Because we know that in car design, the face communicates the personality of the vehicle. We've seen that oftentimes throughout history in car design. You get a feeling when you look at the front of the car, and that's what the company is trying to express to you with that face. Perhaps the face could have been a little bit more aggressive. I get the vibes off a certain type of fish called the axolotl. If you look that one up, you'll get the feeling that if it was smiling, it kind of has a similarity. It's an understated personality. It's not overly trying to impress anybody, but it definitely does. What I'm starting to realize is that this car actually exudes that quiet confidence, man about town. I've done everything. I know who I am. I have nothing to prove. I am who I am. If you really want to see what we can do, I'll rip off my shirt and I'll show you my pecs and I'll show you my six-pack and I'll show you my cannonball delts, and then we'll get down to seeing who the champion is. So this car actually is starting to transform itself a little bit from what I thought was the timid kind of approach to something that is actually wearing a suit that kind of hides the personality of the car. If I look at the side, I'm looking at something that's virtually clutterless. Now, is that exciting? No. Is it well done? Absolutely. There's no confusion. There's no, where do I go now? What does this line do? Why is it there? It's a pure, sensual, exquisitely handled surface. Is it exciting enough on the side? Does it provide you with an eyegasm? Perhaps not. It's a bit like Sophia Loren dressed to go to church. Now, on the front, we have the side marker and the side repeater down low. On the side, that's a requirement. Then you see a beautiful shut line, a beautiful execution of the front door shut line, which is almost going directly down from the A-pillar straight on a nice controlled line towards the middle of the front wheel. That looks always controlled, precise, and balanced. The black over the canopy, over the greenhouse, that's a very beautiful execution of the way we do modern design. Very recognizable today in modern architecture, where a lot of the modern buildings seem to be made out of glass. That's only because the glass panel is in front of the structure, so you hide a lot of the construction, a lot of the structural elements behind a beautiful, smooth, black glass surface. That works very well. Now, the other thing I'm not too sure about, because I can't see it very well in the photographs, is the bottom of the door shut line, where it's located. If they've not continued the shut line down underneath as far as possible in order to be able to lift your heel without having to lift your heel too high, then that door shut line has probably been compromised and could potentially be located somewhere around the intersection of the black sill panel, the black rocker panel, and the body color, which means you're going to probably have a slight issue with getting your heel in and out of the car. That could possibly be, from an ergonomic point of view, an issue. There are ways to find solutions. I know if you look at the 720S, we angled the cut line of the tub side section downwards in order to provide a little bit more room for the foot of the driver and the passenger to get in and out. So perhaps Gordan's team has provided a solution like that. Let's hope so. The other interesting thing that I see on the side of this car is an absence of a door handle. That is right up my street. I love cars without door handles. Door handles for me are so yesterday, so last century, so last millennium. The fact that, again, that it's a clean body side without the disturbance of any door handles is excellent. Super execution, I love it. Then, as we move to a little bit past the rear door, it starts to get, again, quite interesting. So I'd imagine that Gordan has found a solution to packaging the luggage on this car in a very clever way, much like he did on the F1. So you can see here that Gordan has provided a space on the side of the car, just behind the door, which allows you to access that area. Now, if I can just open it. There. So I'm sure that on the T.33 he's provided something that is maybe even more improved on this car than on the 1994 F1. Now there's a cut line on the B-pillar as you go up, and that panel there doesn't necessarily have to be split the way it is here. But the fact that it is split means that that probably is a moving panel, and it's actually on both sides of the car, I've noticed. So my thinking is that is very similar to the solution provided perhaps on the roof of the P1, where we have the fuel access for putting fuel obviously into the car. On the other side, we had the charging point. I don't like the line per se, but it's probably needed to be there. The only way to eliminate that would be to do a live hinge like you have on your toothpaste when you open the cap. Then as we move to the back of the car, and around the roof area, what I'm noticing is the very efficient, very typical from Gordan Murray snorkel. That's the intake located on the roof of the vehicle to suck more air into the engine. Great way for all kinds of cars to get more power. But the unusual thing with this one is that it does not look like it's planted onto the roof of the vehicle. I can see fairly large open spaces around the snorkel from the top view. I can see that that snorkel, that air intake on the roof, is actually not on the roof. It's actually poking through an opening in the roof, and it's attached to the engine itself, to the manifold itself. So that is extremely clever, I would say. That's a great engineering approach. As we move back even further, now I start to see something extremely clever, and that is making me realize that they have done their homework in the sense of improving the luggage access to the vehicle. Being that on the F1, it is very small, but now I can see that they have a fender on the rear, a cover for the rear that actually opens up completely. What's strange about that? The hinging system, the fact that it's a suicide type opening system. Now, if they haven't thought about it, which I'm sure they have, but if you're flying along at 200 miles an hour and you need to stop, if they had some kind of system available that would allow you to open those up and serve as an air brake, the spoiler in the back, as I'm looking at this car here and also on the F1, most people think that you need these to keep the back end glued to the road. In other words, the wind and the spoiler are basically helping you. But what it's actually doing is pushing the rear of the car down. And by pushing it down, gives you even more emphasis, more power to the rear brakes. The air brake, as it comes up like that, allows the pressure to be applied to settle the rear end of the car and keep it better, more stable to the road as you're high-speed braking. So that's a great thing. The other thing I'm seeing from the top view is something that I miss quite a bit in the era of car design today. I mean, can you improve on the design of the traditional Coca-Cola bottle? Look at it and you'll see that it has one of the nicest, most ergonomic shapes ever designed. Very characterful, very sexy, very sensual. Pinching in on the waist, expanding out where the wheels are located, gives you that nice flow to the side of the body. A lot of changes in the lighting of the vehicle, which means that the reflections start to dance around, start to look very beautiful, make it look very dynamic. As I come down past the wheel arch opening on the rear wheel, it stops fairly high up and it mismatches as that body color comes down behind the rear wheel and then starts to arc forward. It completely mismatches anything on the side of the car in front of the rear wheel. Why is that important? Because of the flowing nature of good design. We try to make lines go to another area and join up with something else. That makes it one language. And here we have a slight mismatch. There's no joining of the bottom of the sill panel in front of the rear wheel to the part of the body panel behind the rear wheel. It happens abruptly, too abruptly, and I don't think it works as nice as it could. But then again, as we look towards the back of the car, beautiful hips. I just miss a little bit of aggressiveness or tension or demonstration that this is a powerhouse of a V12 engine that, let's face it, you want to see the engine. You don't want to see it completely exposed. That would be like a lady not wearing, but what you want to see is hints of the engine. So the more you can see hints of the engine, the more exciting it's going to be. And I feel that that rear deck there covers a little bit too much of this outstanding and gorgeous V12 that I know is being packed in there. Again, if you look at the rear of the car, I could imagine that the open space between the two round taillights is open. What they've done between the taillights, they have, oh no, they've put mesh. And I'm sure all of you know what I feel about mesh. I think it's for those people that shouldn't be here anyways, because if they're stupid enough to put their hand into there and get it burned, well, they shouldn't, you know, continue spreading their DNA. I love these taillights. I think they do the job because, I mean, again, in a sense of pure design, you can't get much more effective than a circle. And the way they've done this taillights on here, almost concept car-like in the sense that they almost have a 3D hologram type effect, a lot of depth to that taillight. And that is beautiful. I mean, extremely nice. But they have 3 fins on the outside edge of the taillights. Those 3 slats there, I would have to say that's some type of perhaps a protection element. I'd love some feedback on why those 3 bars are there. Then another quite important element on a car of this caliber, of car of this performance, of this level, requires for increased downforce what we call a diffuser in the back. Now, diffuser is something that basically increases the grip of the car, or actually sucks through aerodynamic principles, the rear of the car downwards. It gives you much more of a feeling of being very stable in the car, very planted on the road. Something very interesting is going on how they're controlling the downforce in the front and the downforce in the back of the car through the use of obviously the rear diffuser and potentially a front diffuser that I can't see yet, but that must be planting the car down in such a way that is unique to the T.33 handling. Another point I wanted to bring up on the doors of this car was the fact that the shut line on the roof appears to prove the point that this is not a normal opening door system. Now we know on the F1, if I can open the door here, this going over the A-pillar is what we call a dihedral door system. Now you can have a lot of different door opening systems. You can have a gull wing, traditional gull wing, which flips straight up, but the dihedral door system is something that is incredibly practical, takes very, very little space sideways on its motion upwards, rotates forward and allows you an incredibly large ingress-egress area to get in and out of. I know that there are issues with weight, so in the interest of making this car as light as possible, I've experienced in the past research on our dihedral door opening systems at McLaren, where we've actually managed to do a single hinge system that allows you to lift the door in such a way that you only need one hinge. I mean, you could actually probably use one hinge and it might be larger than two of these hinges in weight. But again, if you can reduce it and get one hinge instead of two hinges, that's only a win-win thing I can imagine. But I would hope that they followed the principle of less is more. Probably could have been done with one hinge. Let's hope that this car does have it. If they do, I think again, that's another plus point towards the superior engineering of the T.33. Now, having said all of that, what is my impression overall of this vehicle? I have learned quite a bit, actually being able to go around the car. Nothing radical with the T.33 in terms of first impressions, but as you get into it, there are a lot of clever solutions to the design and the engineering. I wouldn't expect anything less than from Gordan Murray Automotive in terms of being able to produce a car that is at its highest level. If you look at the F1, it is still considered the supercar of the last millennia. Now, what we have to consider with the T.33 is that this is probably the last extreme internal combustion engine type vehicle before we transition to what we would call the electric era coming soon. Now, what I would imagine they have done as this last hurrah is package the most exquisite, the most exciting, the most emotional powered internal combustion engine ever with a design that reflects the most beautiful era, the most beautiful design language in a way that we have the best of both worlds. And it's the swan song, I would say, of the current crop of the most impressionable type of hypercars that we will be putting on, maybe not me anymore, but the young kids of today will be remembering the era of the internal combustion engine with a vehicle like the T.33, if not the T.33, which can be considered the king of them all today. And now for the all-important design rating. This is an extremely difficult one for me to place simply because I understand the intensity and the passion that has gone into this whole car. Nothing is left behind. As an ICE type vehicle with that kind of styling, I think it hits a home run. I don't know what you call it in cricket, but definitely a 6 or something like that. I would not be able to give it a 10. I know I gave the Honda E a 10. I don't even own a Honda E, but I find that design extremely precise for what it is. Whereas with the T.33, I have to knock it down a little bit because there are elements that don't grab me by the cojones, maybe. And I would like it to do that, but still in that subdued, understated way that Gordan and team have achieved it. So for all those reasons, I would have to give this car a rating of 9.91. Now the reason for that is because I know I gave the Aston Martin Valhalla a 9.91. Now this car had what I would almost call the English Versace look, the very almost sensual, very extravagant type of design language. And whereas this car from Gordan Murray Automotive and Team is more of a London sort of English Savile Row type look, much more restrained, much more English. And for that reason, it's kind of hard to separate the two, because one makes a definitive statement of innovation, visible innovation, and the other one does it also, but in a much more restrained and more fitting character of its English heritage. So in that respect, I think the T.33 merits its position as a true example of understated English hypercar elegance. As always, let me know your comments, let me know your thoughts, let me know your opinions as to whether this car's design merits its incredible underpinnings, its incredible engineering, or does the appearance of a modern 60s style design not meet that pinnacle of automotive engineering. I love to hear your opinions. It's great to hear the controversy. It's great to hear the diversity of opinions. And just to let you know, I'm now also on Twitter as well as all other social media channels. So if you go to Twitter, look up Frank Stephenson Design, let me know your views. Let me know if you want to submit any design critiques. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.